They say silence is golden, right? That's why I chose Cypress Ridge, this small, tightly wound development tucked outside of Austin. After 30 years, I was done. 30 years as a subsurface specialist, mostly with military exploration units. I'd spent half my life listening to the earth groan 2,000 feet beneath pressure, analyzing core samples that looked like history bound up in rock. All I wanted was a quiet garden, maybe a couple of chickens and the sound of the wind, just threading its fingers through the oak leaves. What I hadn't counted on, what no retired military man can ever fully prepare for, was the HOA. 8 years ago, when I bought this lot, the quiet edge lot, the HOA seemed manageable. Annoying, sure, like a persistent housefly, but nothing compared to the bureaucracies I'd spent decades dismantling. I paid my dues, kept the hedges trimmed to regulation height, even accepted their approved color swatches. But 3 years ago, everything shifted. A woman named Veronica Ronnie Sterling was elected president. She was a real estate agent before she became the queen of the cul-de-sac. I remember the meeting. She swept in, wearing this sharp cobalt blue suit, smiling with edges that curled a little too tight like they had teeth. She promised optimization and sustainability, throwing around buzzwords like cost-cutting and self-sufficiency every time she took a breath. She treated every lawn like a listing that needed fixing, and every homeowner like a liability. Her new obsession? Cutting our municipal water bills. The contract was up for renewal, and instead of renegotiating, Ronnie floated the idea of drilling a community well. Free water, she called it. Just tap into the groundwater, bypass the city entirely. I watched the board nod along like synchronized bobbleheads. Only old Mr. Delgado raised a quiet concern about permits, contamination, maybe an environmental study. Ronnie shut him down fast. "We're not asking for opinions," she snapped. "We're asking for solutions. The worst part?" She had a following. People love the idea of sticking it to the man, even if the man is just the utility company. I kept my head down, hoping logic would win out, that some paperwork hurdle would stop her. Then the letter arrived. Notice of Ground Access Section D. It was printed in bright yellow, tucked into my mailbox without postage. It informed me that surveyors would need temporary access to the easement bordering my back fence as part of the community-wide groundwater initiative. No return address, no phone number, just a stamped signature. Ronnie Sterling, HOA president. I called the main HOA number, voicemail. I emailed, no response. The next morning, there were white and red survey stakes in my grass. They'd walked onto my land while I was asleep. I'm not a man who yells. I was trained to assess, observe, and act with precision. But that morning, I found myself gripping those stakes like I wanted to use them as weapons, my jaw popping, grinding my teeth so hard. There were kids who played in that backyard. There was a reason I bought the edge lot, to stay away from people like Ronnie. I walked back inside, went to the military-style drafting table in my office, and pulled out the thick green binder. Subsurface Survey, Region 19B. It dated back to '93. Inside were diagrams, pressure maps, and colored overlays indicating high sulfur zones, dead pockets of gas, buried under ancient layers of silt and shale. The exact formation beneath Cypress Ridge was marked in a searing orange. Unstable text. Ch2 text as a risk, not for residential use. Remember the drill rig that collapsed during that original survey? The dogs in a nearby kennel that stopped barking? The EPA report that got buried after a contractor filed for bankruptcy? This wasn't a maybe hazard. It was documented fact, archived, and then utterly ignored by the developers who paved over it a decade later. And now Ronnie wanted to drill straight through it. I made 6 copies. One went into a certified letter to the HOA's official P.O. box, another to city zoning, a third to the Department of Environmental Quality. I even drove one down to the mayor's office and left it with his assistant. I was not about to let someone unleash sulfur gas 200 yards from where I slept. Days passed. Nothing changed. The flag stayed up. The HOA newsletter praised upcoming drilling operations and community-wide enthusiasm. Ronnie even posted a photo of herself on Facebook, standing next to the flagged dirt with a caption, "No more water bills." Another HOA victory! I printed that photo, pinned it above my coffee maker. A reminder, a warning, this wasn't over. And deep in my bones, the bones that had once felt seismic rumblings before they ever reached the surface, I knew the earth was holding its breath. The morning they showed up for Phase 2, I was pruning the blackberry vines along my trellis when I heard voices, clipped, purposeful and entirely too close. I leaned over the fence just in time to see 3 men in neon yellow vests stepping onto my property with a surveyor's scope. One of them was already pushing a fiberglass rod into the ground, tapping the soil like he was knocking on a door he didn't own. I didn't say a word at first. I just stood still, let the rage settle deep into my chest, a cold, heavy weight I'd been trained to carry. The calmest man in the room is often the most dangerous. Then I walked out the side gate. The lead surveyor barely looked up. "Morning, sir." Just marking the eastern perimeter for the community drilling project. He might as well have said he was repainting my living room. "You're standing on private property," I said, even and low. "There is no community easement here. Not by law, not by deed." He gave me a tight, condescending smile, the kind contractors reserve for old men they think can be bullied. "We have authorization from the HOA, I held up my hand. "Authorization from Ronnie Sterling does not supersede Texas property law." That made him pause. I could see the flicker in his eyes, the internal conflict between the job he was told to do and the man in front of him who clearly knew what the hell he was talking about. "I'm going to need you to remove your equipment," I said, stepping between him and the stake he'd driven near my prize rosebush. "And I strongly suggest you check the plat maps before you find yourself named in a civil trespass case." They started packing up. Not in a panic, but with that guilty quickness of men who knew they weren't supposed to be there. As they left, I snapped photos, license plates, equipment tags, every angle. The next morning felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. The air tasted metallic, not in some dramatic apocalyptic movie way. No blood-red skies, but something subtle, dry, acrid, like the ghost of a match burned out too close to the nose. I stepped outside just as the sun began to slice over the ridge. The leaves on the trees closest to the drill site were already curled in at the edges, yellowed like they'd been scalded. My stomach tightened. Then I heard it, a high-pitched whine, almost ultrasonic, layered beneath the deep mechanical churn of the rig. It sounded wrong, not like water resistance. It sounded like the earth was screaming. I walked to the property line and saw it all unraveling. They'd gone deeper. The rig was bucking, hitting gas pockets. The pressure release valve was hissing violently, and a thin yellowish mist was spewing from the shaft. It billowed out, hugging the ground, seeping low across the lawn. No one was wearing masks. No one had a damn clue. I vaulted the fence and ran toward the rig. "Shut it down." "You've hit a gas seam." One of the younger workers stumbled backward, coughing hard, clutching his chest. He collapsed in the grass. The mist burned my eyes instantly like chopping onions. I held my breath, knelt, and dragged the kid out of the haze by his vest. "You need medical attention now," I growled at the others. "That's hydrogen sulfide. It's lethal in high concentrations." Ronnie showed up 5 minutes later, still in yoga clothes, still with that clipboard. She barely looked at the unconscious worker. "He's probably dehydrated," she muttered. "It's already hot today." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't heat stroke. You've punctured a sulfur vein. You have no permits, no oversight, no hazmat protocol. You're operating a high-risk rig in a residential zone." She smirked. "That's your opinion." "No, that's science," I yelled. But she was already on the phone, probably prepping to spin this into another minor disruption. A breeze picked up, carrying more of the yellow mist down the hill. The smell was getting stronger now, like rotten eggs soaked in bleach. A couple of neighbors wandered out, clutching their noses. It had begun. I went back inside, grabbed my emergency respirator, a relic from a different life, and sealed my house. Then, I opened my laptop and started filming. I narrated every page, every map, every document I'd gathered. I spoke into the camera like a deposition, because I knew Ronnie would lie. Chemistry didn't lie. Video didn't lie. Then I called 911. They transferred me to the fire department. I gave them coordinates, chemical suspicion, symptoms, everything. The dispatcher asked one question I'll never forget. How many are dead? None yet, I thought. But the day was young. By noon, Cypress Ridge looked like something dying. The Montext hue. Text S and gas, heavier than air, was dragging itself low across the lawns, slinking into gardens like it had a mind, seeking every root, every green thing, every open lung. Then Mrs. Martin's scream. She was kneeling on the grass holding her dog. The animal was stiff. Hydrogen sulfide doesn't care about love. The sirens arrived. Fire trucks, hazmat vans, police. They moved like people who understood exactly what they were walking into. The crew chief pointed at the drill and signaled the operator to shut it down. The operator hesitated, looking at Ronnie, and Ronnie, without a mask, shook her head. "Don't stop!" We're almost at the water table." That was when I saw something break in the firefighters' faces. Not fear, but pure disbelief. The "is she actually insane" kind. The crew chief advanced, grabbed the emergency kill lever on the control unit and yanked it down. The drill shrieked, a metallic scream, and went still. Ronnie looked like she'd been slapped. "You have no right to interfere with community development projects." The fire captain stepped forward, his voice the tone of a man who had seen too many preventable tragedies. "Ma'am, step back now. This site is a hazardous contamination zone. You've breached a sulfide pocket," Ronnie scoffed. "You people always exaggerate. It's just a smell." And then almost on cue, the wind shifted. The haze lifted and the sunlight hit it. In that pale yellow fog, we saw them, leaves falling. Not like autumn, but like a tree dying in real time. The big oak by the driveway shed its leaves all at once. Then the smaller maple. One breath, one gust, and an entire neighborhood turned gray. I filmed it all. The panic, the dying foliage, the emergency response. And Ronnie still standing there, arms crossed, refusing to see what she had done. When the deputy approached her, she tried to push past him. "I have a meeting to run." He grabbed her arm firmly. "Ma'am, you're done here." For the first time, her face changed. Not remorse, fear, but fear came too late. The earth had been wounded and the gas was free. I sat in my kitchen that night, air purifier humming at full blast. I called the state, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I used a number passed to me by a former military colleague, Tony Reyes. "Tony, this is Roar. Sulfur release in a residential development. Unauthorized drilling. Gaswanwak's exposure confirmed. This isn't a drill." I then filed a report with the Attorney General, attaching my digitized maps, satellite overlays, and photographic evidence. I broke the files into zip folders and named them. HOA Criminal Negligence Part 1. It was tedious, slow, but it was airtight. By the next morning, the media frenzy had reached full boil. And then there was Ronnie, on the morning broadcast, hair perfect, flanked by 2 board members who looked sick to their stomachs. "This incident is being grossly exaggerated by individuals with a personal vendetta," she read from a pre-written statement. What occurred was an unforeseeable geological anomaly, not negligence. I nearly choked on my coffee. Unforeseeable. I pulled up the certified mailing receipt from 3 weeks prior, signed by Ronnie herself, clearly dated, clearly attached to the detailed warning about the sulfur pocket. The cracks started forming. On the neighborhood Facebook page, once a shrine to bake sales, a new thread erupted. Did the HOA know about the gas before drilling? Someone posted screenshots of my warning emails. Then the bombshell. An anonymous whistleblower, likely one of the board members, released Ronnie's internal emails. In one, dated 2 days before the drilling, she wrote, "I know Ben Rohr is going to throw a fit. Let him. He's just bitter and afraid of change. If he makes trouble, we'll cite him for lawn violations until he backs down." It was over. The neighborhood's faith in her cracked like thin glass. A local station called. They came that afternoon. I stood next to the wilting roses in my backyard, clipping the mic to my shirt. I gave them everything. The trespassing, the ignored certified mail, the geological data, the suffering. I didn't yell. I spoke plainly, like a man whose warnings had been laughed at until the earth itself rose up to prove him right. They aired the segment that night, split-screened with Ronnie's press conference. My footage played like a counter-testimony. Then the cut to me, eyes level with the camera. You can't outvote physics. You can't hold a meeting and decide sulfur isn't dangerous. This was preventable. All of it. A week later, the federal heat arrived. Helicopters, black and quiet. Multi-agency coordination aircraft. The orange barricades were replaced with military-style fencing. Uniformed agents in full hazmat gear marked the soil like it was a crime scene, because it was. I was in my kitchen when I saw the first agent walk up to Ronnie's front porch. She answered the door in a crisp white blouse, composed, maybe even smug. That lasted about 30 seconds. Then she stepped outside slowly, flanked by 2 agents. I couldn't hear the words, but then the cuffs came out. They weren't rough, but it was deliberate, controlled, official. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the woman who had ruled over hedge heights and mailbox colors was walked out in handcuffs. Her eyes scanned the street as they led her to the black SUV. And then, God help her. Her gaze met mine. I stood in my front yard, arms folded, respirator slung over one shoulder, not gloating, just witnessing. I wanted her to know, this didn't happen to you. You did this. The door closed. The SUV pulled away. The HOA board resigned, one by one. The residents gathered, not for a protest, but for a meeting. Under the big oak tree, what was left of it, more than 50 people came together. They weren't angry anymore. They were ashamed. Ashamed they hadn't questioned more. Ashamed they'd believed Ronnie's spin. Ron Miller, once Ronnie's loudest supporter, stood up. "We thought we were protecting our property values," he said, his voice cracking. "But all we did was hand over power to